You're watching Co-op for Two, broadcasting live from Champaign, Illinois, Sunday, July 2nd, 2023, around 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And we're back to play Dear Holmes. This is our fourth letter of the set of four that make up the Fickle Fiancés. So this will be our last letter proper from the case, and then if you'll remember how this system works, there'll be one more letter next week from Sherlock Holmes himself, or maybe Watson, revealing how he has solved it. So this will be our last chance to solve it. But before we open it, we might want to get on the record any theories anyone has. Get everyone on the record here. Before we open it up, though, let's do some bookkeeping. Greg and I just recorded 2 reviews for Stranger Things Upside Down, a board game by Rob Daviau, cooperative board game. You can watch those reviews on the channel. We didn't love it. It's got some interesting stuff. I don't think I'd really recommend it. But if you're interested in that game design topic of push your luck, it does have some interesting ideas. What else should we talk about? Last week we played through about 27 hours playing Escape Tales Children of Wormwoods, which was a narrative puzzle game, sort of supernatural, but one of the best such games we've played, certainly the longest, but really quite impressive, very enjoyable, had some real tense moments. To me, a very nice balance of narrative and puzzle and a little bit of gamey decisions involved. And I'll be recording a review of that soon, but I definitely would recommend it. What else should we talk about? Something interesting happened the other day. So one of the people that joins me often for especially the puzzle games, but joins us in the channel very often, is someone named Nicola, who's very good at puzzles. And when Greg came over yesterday or the day before and we filmed these Stranger Things video, Greg said, "You've got another coder on the channel, huh? Another programmer in the channel." And I said, "I don't think so. Who are you talking about?" And he said, "Nicola." And I said, that's news to me. What makes you say that? And he brought up the Wikipedia page for Nicola. Nicola turns out to be the original developer of MAME. For those of you who don't know, MAME was a multi-arcade emulator. One of the earliest ones that could emulate video games and consoles, and there were thousands of games for it that got ported to it, got brought over, the cartridges decoded and the hardware decoded. I mean, MAME was a huge deal. It's Nicola's basically a star in the programming world, so that was pretty cool. I mean, it's 1997, but really quite a surprise. So Nicola hasn't. I was telling my wife, like, if it was me, I probably would have found a way to interject it into the conversation. Like, I would have mentioned it. I would have found an excuse to mention it. But Nicola's like, Anyway, Nicola has been helping along with Rob and a couple other people on the Discord, helping me brainstorm and do actual work, coding support for High and Low, which is the narrative mystery game that I'm working on, set in New York City in the 30s. And I'm going to show you a little. We're going to take a couple minutes to look at it. But the other thing I wanted to say before we did this is that I was recently speaking to John Keane. He posted on Board Game Geek saying he's going to make a follow-up case to Razorhurst. If you haven't watched my playthrough and review of Razorhurst is a print and play, big, long game sort of in the genre of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, but with some new ideas. And Razorhurst was very amazing and based on true story. And so it's great that John Keane is working on a follow-up. But it also made me realize how much inspiration I got from looking at Razorhurst in High and Low. So I'm going to show you very quickly just some little progress on High and Low. So I spent a lot of time going through the New York City open source mapping data to get maps of New York City neighborhoods and figure out ways to print it out and make it look nice. But I've spent the last couple weeks working on directory code to create directories, create fictional people that live in the city, businesses, etc. Businesses haven't quite gotten done yet. But let me just show you. In fact, maybe we should start here. So here's a little mock-up of a neighborhood, Little Italy, real neighborhood. So the whole point of this game is for it to use to feel real historical pictures, real maps, real places that existed at the time. And my sort of gimmick, my hook for this set of cases is that New York City, Manhattan mainly, is a city of neighborhoods. So instead of one big giant map like in Sherlock Holmes, you've got a couple dozen, 24 maps of different neighborhoods. So here's the Little Italy neighborhood. This just show you, you'd have an atlas, bigger maps than a 8.5 by 11, I would hope. But maps for each neighborhood. Here's the Little Italy neighborhood. You can see my code is using the real map data of New York City, trying its best to simplify it to keep it as clean as possible. It's numbered these block locations. This would help you figure out who lives where, what businesses are where. And this is just a little mock-up showing how we would have like a little photo and some information about the neighborhood. So here's a map of one neighborhood. And then if you're not familiar with Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, this isn't going to make that much sense. But here's an example of the white pages. So here, this is just a small section, but these are all businesses and people. And this is all fictionally generated people trying to be ethnically representative of the neighborhood. So each neighbor has a specific ethnic background. So Little Italy is heavily Italian. So the names generated are based on Italian names. You can see each name has their actual street address, and then the map and block number they're on, and then their lead number or their phone number, which is unique. So for example, if we find someone who lives in Little Italy, Giuseppe Pietro, who lives on 113 Baxter Street, you can see he's in Little Italy neighborhood, block 129. So if we wanted to see where he lived, we know his address, but now with the block and neighborhood, we can find him. So he's on 129, which is going to be somewhere here. Should be a little easier to find than in Sherlock Holmes because it's ordering them from left to right, top to bottom. But there are some edge cases. So there's 129. And that's going to be Baxter Street, one of these. Is that where he was? I lost him. Anyway, oh, there he was. Pietro, 113 Baxter Street, 129. Okay, well, there's Canal. There's Hester. Maybe this is Baxter with a label that wouldn't fit. So from that directory, you would know what block he lived on. You'd know he lived, you got his actual street address, but then you would know he lived here. So if you had some spatial puzzle, like you might know that he lives across from the scene of the crime, etc. So that's our white pages. And then each person has their own, it's written as a telephone number, but it's actually their lead number. That's what you would look up. So in this game, you wouldn't look up the block, which you would in Sherlock Holmes, because there could be a ton of people living in that block. So the directory creates unique lookup numbers for each person. This is the yellow pages, very similar thing you have in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. Exactly the same layout, except this one is organized by type of business, and residence wouldn't be in this. And then the little more controversial one is a new idea, is a reverse directory. So for example, we found Giuseppe lives in Little Italy in block 129 here. So this is just Little Italy. So if we open up Little Italy and we find block 129, we can see the other people that live on that same area with Giuseppe. So here's Giuseppe, who lived at 113 Baxter, and here are people who live on that same block. So Louis DeSalvio is this guy's cross neighbor, and this building is probably right below Giuseppe, same address. And then you could look at the neighboring blocks and see, well, maybe at a crime like this is the subway he might use because it's right across the street from him. So that's the idea of this reverse directory, which is it doesn't exist in Sherlock Holmes, but that's my idea that it might support some more puzzles. All right, so that's high and low. If you're interested in that project, there's a thread on Board Game Geek about it. I could use all the help I can get. Anything else to talk about? I guess that's it. Shall we get started with our Dear Holmes case? All right, so before we open our last letter, let's quickly look at, before we open our next letter, let's quickly look at the last letter and see the things we highlighted, because there are a couple interesting things. So on the last letter, our woman talks to McBain, the reporter, who's playing a central role in our case. And he says a couple interesting things. First, he says, as his fiancé, you don't know his past. And then he corrects himself. He says, well, as his current fiancé. So some of us thought, oh, is he saying that Lillian, the woman who was killed, who's McBain's fiancé, was she previously engaged to Dalton? That's one thing you might want to keep in mind. I'm not so sure that that's true. I think the easier thing, the bigger, broader stroke is that we suspect Dalton Ward is a real politician trying to burnish his image, and he's trying to get married to bury the rumors of him being a ladies' man and drinking and all that. So I just read that as saying he's been trying to marry someone to look respectable, and that he's not talking about Lillian, but he could be. And then McBain says a very interesting thing, quoting from his poet again. He mentions a quote from the poet about the quantum of the sin which the hazard of concealing hardens within. And one of the things that I thought when I saw that is that an allusion to the diamond? So one of our big questions is how did Dalton Ward get the diamond in his stomach that made it look like he had food poisoning that injured him and caused him to bleed, to cough up blood, etc. And our two main theories now are that the Vesta woman accidentally dropped one of her bejeweled fake diamonds into the oyster when she was feeding it to him. The other theory was that the reporter sort of snuck it into his cake. And then we know they had a fight, and Dalton Ward called him a devil. So one possibility is that McBain wants to punish him for leading to the death of Lillian, the fiancée of the reporter, and so he's thrown this diamond in his food or in his drink, and he's like, choke on it. This is metaphorically the sin hardening within. So I had dismissed that. I had come to believe the theory of it falling accidentally from Vesta's dress. And this makes me unsure. This brings back the idea that the reporter did it. Then he tells us about Lillian. He's finally telling Rose Dresser the name of the woman. And he says, the spirits demand justice. You think your husband's a reformed man. He's not. This sounds like he wants justice for her. This might lean you more towards the fact that did Dalton Ward have something to do with this woman's death? This is a big open question for us, whether McBain, the reporter, killed her, whether she killed herself, or whether Dalton Ward killed her. This seems to suggest that the reporter, McBain, blames our guy for her death. Then the reporter leaves his notebook, and she rips out a blank page that has some impressions. And when she scribbles it, when she shades it, she uncovers a code. We decrypted the code. The code that was in his notebook impression says, Lily, wait for me tonight on Blackfriars Bridge, D-A-L, Dalton, Dal. And we had a really good epiphany here, which I'm not sure is true, but Rob came up with a great theory. So my theory was, okay, I get it now. This was a note Dalton wrote to Lily. The reporter intercepted it, copied it in his notebook, and that's how he discovered the affair. And then maybe we thought, okay, he knew his fiancée was meeting Dalton at the bridge. Maybe he hid out there, intercepted them, maybe killed her, pushed her off the bridge. Rob had a brilliant theory. Rob said, doesn't it make more sense that McBain actually wrote this note pretending to be from Dalton, setting up his wife to meet him at the bridge where he killed her? One of the things that's really nice about that is it explains explains the notebook. It explains how the notebook had an impression of this note, but not the note. Rather than saying that McBain intercepted it, made a copy of it, and then tore it out of his notebook, this basically says that McBain wrote the note in his notebook, tore it off, and left it for Lily as a trap, which I really like. On the other hand, you might ask a couple of questions. One is, this looks like handwritten, and it's the same handwriting as all the other notes, so doesn't that not suggest that McBain couldn't have written it? That's one theory. Another issue I had was, at our last discussion, I thought, well, that's a lot better, because if McBain had discovered Lillian having an affair, followed her, and if he saw Dalton Ward push her off the bridge, why would he be messing around with this? Why wouldn't he just go to the police and tell them, hey, I just saw this happen? So that sort of led us to think that it couldn't have been that McBain discovered this note and followed them and discovered the affair. But thinking about it a little more, I think the way you could imagine it happened a different way, which is you could imagine that McBain discovered the note possibly after the fact. So imagine that rather than postulating McBain has followed her and pushed her off the bridge, imagine that McBain is waiting for his wife. She doesn't come home. She turns up dead. Then he goes through her stuff and he finds this note and he puts two and two together and he realizes, aha, she's having an affair and she either killed herself because of that affair or Dalton Ward pushed her off and killed her, or he's not sure. In that scenario, our reporter doesn't have hard evidence that Dalton Ward is to blame, but he could blame Dalton Ward, either for her real suicide or suspect that he murdered her or not be sure. But that's a scenario where he didn't frame her but rather that he blames Dalton. And then that would be the explanation for the discussion they had at the wedding. He could have told Dalton, hey, I figured out your affair. I blame you. I'm going to write about you. I'm going to expose you. So I'm sort of back to a 50-50 now about whether McBain found the note after the fact and discovered the affair and blames Dalton Ward for her suicide, or Dalton Ward pushed her off to cover it up. Or that McBain set her up, although, yes, Debbie points out something I just realized, which is absolutely true. It can't be that David McBain found out about the affair from this note, because Lily has already written Dalton saying, come soon, David found out. Okay, it's absolutely true. This note couldn't have been the note that he found out about. Let's see. Veggie Dog says, we don't know Lillian was killed. I'm still leaning to suicide. That's absolutely true. She could have just killed herself. She could have met up with Dalton Ward and said, David knows it's going to come out, and he may have told her, that's it, I'm cutting you off. I'll deny everything. That may have driven her into depression and she killed herself. Although I argued last time that she's having the affair with him. My big argument last week was that imagine you're Lillian having this affair with a politician. You know he's going to deny you. He's having an affair with you on the side. He's planning to get married next week. You're a nobody to him. You're having an affair with him, but whatever. So now you've found out that your husband knows about it and it's going to come out. That's not necessarily a bad thing for her. It's bad for Dalton that all of his secrets are going to come out. But maybe for her, it's like, this is perfect. Now I can come out of the closet. He won't deny me, whatever. So I don't think she's going to kill herself over that. But I suppose if she meets with Dalton and he says, it's over, I'm never going to see you again, I'm going to deny you, then that would cause her to commit suicide. Or she could tell Dalton, hey, it's all coming out. You're going to be exposed for a fraud. And he said, whoop, pushed her right off the bridge. Let's see. Veggie Dog said, so Emmy says, my main theory is Dalton was deliberately fed the fake diamond by the reporter, and the reporter murdered his fiancée after writing the false note. Debbie says, my current best guess is David killed Lillian and is working with Mags and Vesta to blackmail Dalton. Vesta fed him the diamond from the oyster, but I'm not sure. Veggie Dog says, I agree with Debbie, although I still favor suicide. Doesn't seem possible the diamond could be ingested via chewing or accidentally dropping without Dalton knowing it. The oyster makes the most sense. I tend to agree with you about that. Like, you would chew on the diamond and you would know it. And Tina says, the thing that makes me think it's suicide is the lilies. Why send him lilies if McBain had killed her, just to rub it in? No, I think the explanation for that is that the lilies are being sent. Well, you have a point. Originally, I thought the lilies were being sent by the blackmailers. Yeah, it is, because the note, the other note with the lilies said, careful or all will know of, and this we got cut off, Lillian. I think the person that's blackmailing him is Vesta and Sonny Mags at the club, and we know why. They want him to stop his movement for temperance. So I think the club has been passing these messages back and forth. So the club knows about his affair, and that's where he was meeting to conduct the affair. So I think the blackmail is separate from the reporter. The blackmailers are Sonny Mags and Vesta. Sonny Mags in particular. Okay, so let's just quickly we're almost done here. He says, so she meets she sees the, oops, that's not the right letter. What is the right letter? She sees the new lilies, a sickening sweet scent, not unlike clove. I think we think that's the lilies. Okay, they must be removed. She palms the note, and then he gets all excited about how he's going to use his past to get political office, to show how far he's come and changed. I'll turn the table on him. He knows nothing. He's talking about the reporter. A little suspicious. And then he admits he knew Lillian, but he had nothing to do with her. So I do have some little correction here. So the message on the card seems to be the blackmailer that says keep quiet. What does it say? Not keep quiet, but the note says careful or all will know. That absolutely sounds like it's coming from blackmailers that want him to stop with his temperance stuff. But I did want to see. She meets him in the hospital. She sees the lilies. But does she see? Let's see. She sees the lilies. That's where she gets the coded note, which I think is from Vesta and Sunny Mags. But isn't there some other writing on the card? There is some other writing on the card. It's Jabberwocky stuff, and I guess I was worried that was written by McBain, but I don't think it is. It's not. It's written by... Yeah, there's the card, the strange writing, 'twas brilling, and the slithy toes. This is the Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll. Okay, but that's from his Vesta, that's from his Club Coast, not from McBain. So those are the people blackmailing him, is what I think. Rob says, why would Sunny and Vesta know the code? Well, we know they do. We're pretty sure we know they do, because all of the coded messages went to and from the club, and it's a code used by club members, is what Debbie says. Yeah. The butler tells us, hey, all these coded messages, they always got delivered to the club and left by the club. So it's a club code. So that's why I think they know it, and they know that's where he was having his affairs and doing his bad stuff. So I think that part all makes sense. All right, so before we open this up, let's all get on the record with our current theory prior to this letter about how Lillian died and what McBain's role is and where the diamond came from. So I'm going to say that Lillian committed suicide, but that McBain... Yeah, I'm not sure now. I really love the idea that the note was setting her up. All right, I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to say that. But then why does McBain blame him and say he's got to pay for it? Maybe he just blames him for taking her away from him. All right, if I have to guess, I'm going to guess that the diamond was put in by the oyster by mistake, and that I got to stick with the original theory. I got to stick with Rob's or Emmy's theory that McBain set her up. by faking that note. I just love the idea that that explains why it's not in the notebook anymore. That would mean that he kills her, has gone mad, and still blames Dalton for taking her away from him. Do we have any evidence that Lillian was ever at the club? Well, I mean, that's where the messages are going back and forth, so I assume that's where, but I guess no, I guess we don't have any explicit evidence. Are you ready to read letter 4? Is everyone ready? Or do you want to talk about it first? Is everyone on the record? I've given you my theories. Blackmailed by Vesta and Sonny Maggs. Oyster had the diamond by mistake. David McBain killed his fiancée, but still blames Dalton Ward for driving her away from him. That's my theory. I'm not super sure about any of that, although I feel very confident that the Sonny Maggs is blackmailing him. Is everyone ready to open this up? Have you gotten on the record? Okay, Macken's theory is McBain kills Lillian, Dalton deliberately swallows the diamond to hide evidence. That was my original theory, but I've given up on that one. Rob says, I'm going with the blackmailers is a red herring. So you don't think he's being blackmailed by Vesta and Sonny Maggs? I'm going to turn on the air conditioner here. No other theories, huh? Okay, here we go. We're going to open this up. All right, so nice full 4-page typewritten letter. No ciphers. Let's see what we've got here. Okay, May 19th. Compared to our last letter was May 17th, so 2 days later. 2 days since our last mail. Dear Mr. Holmes, I was relieved to receive your return post today, as I have, in spite of my best efforts, made scant progress on the Coast Code. It's lovely news that you are close to deciphering it. I've tended to your requests as well, and am pleased to report much new information. After McBain's visit 2 days ago, I felt compelled to learn more about Lillian Newton. So even before receiving your letter, I had spent hours searching for, as you suggested, any newspapers or journals printed during the first week of May. Besides an unceremonious obituary in the Telegraph, which noted only that Lillian Newton was deceased, I failed to discover anything until fate smiled upon me today. Ellison had been in the yard tending to the sweet peas this morning while I performed ablutions. After about 30 minutes, I suddenly heard her calling to me. I peered out of my room to find her running up the stairs, waving 2 old editions of the Daily Mirror. My neighbor's groundskeeper, William, is rather fond of the publication, it seems, and since April there have been several articles concerning a grand new garden being opened in Surrey. He mentioned this to Ellison, and this morning, along with the fact that he has kept each edition of the Mirror mentioning the garden, 2 of which were published on the first week of May, I asked Mr. Williams if I could borrow them, and he agreed. You're looking for things like this, yes? Shouted Ellison. Yes, I beamed, and I could not be more grateful, for one of those issues, dated 3 May, held an obituary and a brief newspaper item regarding Miss Newton. I have transcribed the story titled, Woman's Body Recovered from the Thames. This is what our theory was. The body of a young woman identified as Miss Lillian Newton was discovered by a mudlark, someone hunting in the shore in the water for stuff, discovered by a mudlark under the Bankside Pier adjacent to the Globe on Monday morning last. Metropolitan Police Sergeant Grimes has stated that the woman might have leapt or been met with foul play on nearby Blackfriars Bridge, as the tide would have carried her body to its final resting place. The exact cause of death has yet to be determined. Miss Newton had been employed at the Gaiety Theatre. The obituary provides no other details about the death, but it does add that Miss Newton was an aspiring variety stage actress. According to the article, her death likely occurred on the evening of Sunday, 1st of May. I have no doubt you have already observed this detail, but this was the day after Dalton held his Stand for Decency rally at Blackfriars Bridge. I was at his side, and I recall now that David McBain was among the reporters there that day. I did not know his name then, but his blazing red hair is memorable. I cannot discern a connection between the rally and Lillian Newton's death, but I confess I am deeply unsettled by the timing of the two events. It was only an hour later, as Ellison prepared my breakfast, that your special messenger knocked on my door with your letter. Once I read it, I finished, perhaps too quickly, my kippers and toast and began preparing myself to complete your requests. I knew I had little time to act if I also wished to visit Dalton at the hospital today. As you instructed, I retrieved the card that had been fixed to the lilies in Dalton's sick room, as well as the golden pin I found in his hearth. With them, I set off to put your questions to Sonny Maggs, David McBain, and my fiancé. I hope this does not cause any trouble, but I also felt compelled to interview Miss Victoria with the same questions. Let me begin by sharing my conversation with Mr. Maggs. So she's gone back to the Coast Club to talk to Maggs. My meeting with him was unnerving because it demanded that I offer a complete fabrication. I'm not one to lie, Mr. Holmes. I was willing to do so only because Dalton's well-being depends on my following your directives and persuading Maggs that Dalton was not a threat. I greeted Mr. Maggs with an apology and told him I had returned only after realizing how foolishly I had behaved last time. I went on, I am here as an emissary of Dalton's, and explained that the true cause of the most recent tensions between them was the ingestion of a paste diamond that nearly killed my fiancé, and that was almost certainly delivered by your friend, Miss Victoria. This news had the effect you anticipated, for the moment I made the assertion, Maggs rang his precious silver bell. "Get Vesta now," he said through his teeth, and then turned to me. "You're referring to your gathering last week?" And my eyes widened as he confessed. "I saw her feed him that oyster. Crass, I told her, but this..." He stopped as two glimmering curtains pulled apart and Vesta sauntered into the office. She sat and began lighting a cigarette, as if she were alone in the room. Before she could put a match to the tobacco, Mr. Maggs approached and took her left hand in his. "What happened to the ring?" he asked. He took her hand back and lit the cigarette. She took her hand back and lit the cigarette. "The stone was a hunk of glass anyway." Mr. Maggs tapped his ring finger. "Vesta, dear, how did you dispose of that little bauble?" She chuckled. "Well, you wanted something Ward would remember, didn't you?" Mr. Maggs stood, shaking his head. "Do you realize you nearly cost him his life? Get out!" After Vesta departed, he apologized. He wanted Dalton to know that he had no part in the stone ordeal, though he was not entirely forthcoming about his intentions. "Now, you should ask your fiancé about his past loss, and do be careful, Miss Dresser. As for now, let's all take the pot off the boil before it scalds someone," he beseeched. "For my part, I can weather a march of decency, if necessary, as there no doubt will be in April when the fools return." As he moved me towards the door, I pulled the coded florist's card from my purse and held it up. "Look familiar?" I asked. He took it between his fingers, shook his head, and returned it. "Well, it's called a Coast Code, a way for members to send discreet messages. It's childish, but the members like it." As he handed it back, he added, "Do you recall what I said about people being like the moon? These coded messages keep the dark hidden." When I asked him if he could teach me the code, he wagged a finger. It wouldn't be a secret code if I gave it away. It's only revealed to members in good standing. If you should care to purchase a membership and remain active for 30 days, Miss Dresser. He read my expression and chuckled. Finished at Mr. Mag's club, I once again made my way to the offices of the Daily Mirror. He advised that I probe gently and stay focused on the goals, which were to learn the true nature of McBain's relationship with Miss Newton, and if either or both were members of Club Coast. David McBain was not at his desk, so I again sought out the editor, Hachette. He told me McBain would be back before deadline and asked me to wait outside. Before leaving, I ventured a quick question. Holding up the newspaper clipping I had gathered, I asked him why neither their news story nor Miss Newton's obituary mentioned David McBain, their betrothal, or the precise cause of her death. He said, I don't recall that obit. That may have been an omission. I'm not sure their engagement was formal. Everyone here just assumed they were a couple. Looking nonplussed, he added, She was an actress, you know, very pretty. One must wonder what Lillian Newton saw in McBain. Perhaps free publicity? I squinted more closely at the clipping. Is it normal to omit the cause of death when it's a suicide? Hachette took it from me and read it. There's no need to publicize such tragedies. However, I recall speaking with the police at the time, and there was certainly a suicide note. Got to see it myself. It was on a scrap of yellow paper, short but touching, I suppose. He handed the clipping back to me and searched through a file in his desk cabinet. I wrote down what it said for my own records, he stated, extending a serviette across the desk. Here. The note was, as he opined, short. I find it somewhat obscure. Just 4 lines. The best laid schemes of mice and men, gang aft Ackley, and Leia's not brought us but grief and pain for promised joy. That sounds like something that the newspaper guy might write. As I handed it back to Hachette, he noted, the original was signed LN beneath that, because he can't sign her signature, is what I'm thinking. I thanked him and asked if I could wait for McBain at his desk. He grimaced as he held up a finger and said, tread lightly. I waited at the man's station for no more than 5 or 6 minutes before the surrounding workers suddenly fell silent. McBain had stepped in and spied me. What now, Miss Dresser? He stopped short of his desk and put a hand on one hip. As you suggested, I merely held up Dalton's gold pin, and he smirked. If this is an effort to catch me off guard, ye failed. And in that same breath, he readily admitted he was a member of Club Coast. He was quick to add that Dalton had been a regular for years as well. I continued, was Lillian also a member? His brow lowered and his lips tightened. We're done here. Leave. I nodded. Very well, then. Every eye in the room was on me as I turned away from the crazed McBain and left. I was unsettled, but I was determined to carry out the rest of your directives without delay. Fortunately, the walk from there to St. Bart's allowed me to compose myself. In Dalton's sick room, I was found Niles stuffing a shirt into a valise, and my fiancé standing. Sorry about that. And my fiancé standing, straightening his tie before the mirror. As I approached, he turned to me with open arms. I embraced him, and once he stepped back from me, I nerved myself and asked him about the golden pen, as you suggested. What do you mean? He asked. So I took the diminutive mask from my purse and held it up as I answered, this was in your study. He stayed my hand, took the pin from my fingers, and tossed it onto the floor. You shouldn't poke about in my private things, he exclaimed. Don't you trust me? I believe you're in danger, and I was worried about you, came my answer. He took my hand in his and shook his head. "Oh, you're putting too much stock in Mr. Maggs and this whole business with Club Coast," he said. "That was a sad chapter in my life, nothing more." I nodded, but did not relent. "And like little Miss Lillian Newton," I said. He forced a smile, but his face turned ashen when he stood motionless, gobsmacked. Do you honestly believe I had anything to do with her death?" My own inability to answer took me by surprise. I could see a fresh swell of rage rising within him, which then suddenly turned into a flood of tears. "Oh, Lillian Newton. She was... I knew her, of course. From Club Coast. She'd stop in with other actresses from the Gaiety. We became acquaintances. She left her family in Glasgow to work in the theaters here, and we got along famously. But she was a dear friend, that's all. People did think our relationship was romantic, McBain especially," he confessed. You see why he hounds me." Dalton sobbed. "When we met, I didn't want there to be any doubts in your mind, so I quietly ceased contact with Lily, and, well, as you and I grew closer, so too did she and McBain. I never told her why, and now I can't. I'd heard she was doing well, engaged to star in the Orchid. Please believe me, Ruth, this has been plaguing my thoughts for so long." He cried and fell into my arms. I spent the remainder of visiting time comforting Dalton and then returned home to write you. Let's see. Grew closer, so did she and McBain. I never told her why, and now I can't. Okay. I never told her why, and now I can't. Mr. Holmes, suffice it to say I was stunned by my fiancé's revelation. Even more so in light of the card from his sick room, which you recently deciphered. If, as you say, the message should be interpreted as careful of all, or all will know of Al, then his confession raises more questions than it has answered. You will recall that during my visit to Club Coast, Mr. Maggs made it abundantly clear there would be retribution if Dalton threatened his enterprise. Could his warning be a greater concern? In addition to this, there are other possibilities I cannot help but consider. Does Mr. Maggs know something about Dalton or Miss Newton that we have failed to uncover? Dalton's tears seemed honest. Still, I must consider the possibility that he has only shared a portion of the truth. I extend my heartfelt thanks to you again and will be most grateful if you bring closure to this disturbing affair. All right, well, so a couple of things feel like they've lined up a little better. I really feel like now we know she didn't kill herself. Don't we think? Because of how suspicious the suicide note is. The editor, I guess I'm skipping ahead here. Let's do this. Let's do that part though first. The editor says, well, I wrote it down, a copy of it. It was very short. And it had 4 lines. And it's this Irish thing that sounds like it's a Burns. It might even be Robert Burns' quote here. It's a quote from Mice and Men, but it's signed LN. She doesn't have her full signature. This really seems like something that McBain could have written and prepared. And indeed, she did go off the bridge. Could be suicide, but feels like McBain has killed her to me. She was also Scottish, but she was about to star in a play, says Antina. So a bunch of us now think it's murder because of the suicide note. Okay. Now, the more interesting, weird thing we learned here was about the oyster. So we were right in thinking that the oyster came from Vesta, but it wasn't an accident. It was, in fact, stone from a ring. So we know how he got fed it, but it's a little bit weird about why. So Mags yells at her, and he says, for obviously he didn't know about this ahead of time, and he says, "You realize you almost killed him." And she says, she's acting like this femme fatale here. She says the stone was a bunch of glass. Is it a ring that Mags gave to Vesta? Is that right? You wanted something Ward would remember. You wanted something Ward would remember. That's a weird statement, isn't it? Like, what does that mean? So Mags told her, I want something that Ward will remember. I think, is that the, are they talking about the threat about the decency march, the marked up headline? And she took it too far? She does seem to be saying that Mags directed her to say something to Dalton to get him to stop what he was doing. Even though she's gone off on her own, it's a little weird to me what this ring is. Is it a ring from Mags to Vesta that she doesn't like? Or is it a ring from... Or is it a ring from Dalton Ward in the past? That's a little confusing to me. Well, it's more than a little confusing. But then the other thing is, he says, then at the end, Mags seems to say, well, it's no big deal. Yeah, let him do his marches. This doesn't sound like the person who's so interested in blackmail. But is it just because now he thinks things are fine? Macon Leary says, Ward told her to put the frighteners on Dalton and she went off on her own initiative. That kind of, yeah, that's, and Rob seems to agree. So everyone seems to agree that Mags told Vesta to scare off Dalton from his decency march, temperance stuff, and she just went too far. Yeah. I feel like McBain and Vesta are working together. Hardened within seems too specific. That's an interesting idea. But what's the... It doesn't make sense because the one note that says... What doesn't make sense is that what McBain wants and what these two club owners want are very different, right? I mean, what the Lily note said seems to be what Mags wants. Careful or all will know. But that's not McBain. McBain is not sending this message. McBain is just out to punish. He doesn't want Ward to behave differently. This is a statement by the extortionist. But McBain's not an extortionist. McBain doesn't want money. He doesn't care about the temperance. He wants revenge. He wants to write a story exposing Dalton. So this can't be from McBain. That can only be from someone who's trying to extort Dalton. And that has to be Sonny, Mags, and Vesta. I mean, it might not even be Vesta, but sure looks like Vesta's in on it. But that's got to be Sonny Mags. There's no way that McBain is writing that note telling him to be careful and be quiet. Lepto met with foul play at the bridge. There's our diamond. I'm a little confused that Mags doesn't seem to care anymore. But maybe that's because she's already come and said they're going to be friends again. And then Dalton Ward is just lying up a storm here, as the way I read it. He's lying about, he's revealing, he tells her just as much truth as he needs. Each time she catches him and confronts him, he gives a little more truth from her. I mean, I'm sure it's true that he broke it off with Lily, and then she got close to McBain, but really we know he was still having an affair with her. Emmy says, I feel like McBain and Vesta are working together because of the hardened, but what's the point? I mean, what's the point of the letters from McBain's perspective? He just wants to catch Dalton and write him and expose him. Why would he be sending notes threatening, saying, be careful? I think our theory is cementing now that McBain killed Lillian, revealed to Dalton at the wedding, at the engagement, that he killed her and knew about the affair. But Dalton Ward couldn't say anything about it because it would come out then that he was having an affair. So then the only question is Mags blackmailing him? And it seems to me that she is. Maybe even she's gone off on her own. Maybe she's taken the initiative to do the blackmail notes, the extortion notes and flowers. Maybe Mags isn't even aware of that. She's just taken the initiative to do it. And the only reason he's not caring so much now is because she just said that Dalton's going to call off the stuff. After Vesta departed, he apologized. He wanted Dalton to know that he had no part in the Stone ordeal, though he was not entirely forthcoming about his intentions. You should ask your fiancé about his past loss. Be careful. Let's all take the pot off the boil before it scalds someone. This is a little weird, don't you think? After he sends out Vesta, he says he wanted Dalton to know he had no part in the Stone ordeal, though he was not entirely forthcoming about his intentions. Okay. Then he says, you should ask your fiancé about his past loss. What is he talking about? What past loss? Rob asks, why did Holmes tell her to show Dalton's pin to McBain? What would that accomplish? He didn't show Dalton's pin to McBain. He asked her to show Dalton's pin to Dalton. Didn't? Isn't that what happened? She confronts him about throwing the pin in the fireplace. She confronts Dalton with Dalton's pin. Yeah, she shows Dalton his pin and said, why do you put it in the thing? Is Lillian the past loss? I don't think so, because Lillian sent him a note that says he found out about us, so that's not a past loss. It almost sounds like Mags assumes Dalton killed Lily, but he didn't. Past seems like past, not recent. This is all recent that Lillian died. All right, so I set up a new thing so I could go to break by pushing something under the desk, but now I've hit it twice by mistake here. That's not really promising. I'm clearly going to have to change that up a little bit. Is his past loss his old fiance? Remember remember the newspaper person told us about you're his current fiance? I have a feeling that Dalton was previously engaged and she died. Maybe he even killed her. I have a feeling that Dalton was that this is a connection to the previous engagement. What do you think about that theory? Macon says, yeah, engaged to Lily. But would you call that previous past loss? It's hard to imagine why you would call someone a past loss who died like last month. It is last month, right? It's not like a long time ago. Or was it? Yeah, dated 3rd of May. So it's 2 weeks ago that Lillian died. You wouldn't refer to someone who died 2 weeks ago as your past loss. And you certainly weren't engaged to her 2 weeks ago. I think they're talking about a different thing. I think they're talking about Dalton had a past loss of a previous fiancé. That is not relevant for our story, but it's suspicious. Let me point out one more thing. Remember that in the first letter, at the engagement party, McBain and Dalton go to have a meeting. They leave. McBain comes out with a big smirk on his face. Dalton chases after him, saying, that guy's a devil. And we had 2 theories for that. One was that he was the one who fed him the diamond, that he's smirking like I put the diamond in your stomach as punishment. And the other one that he confessed that he knew about the affair and killed Lillian. Now that we know Vesta dropped the diamond with the oyster, I think this is even more. This seems to now suggest that it had to be the other alternative, that what McBain talked to him about in the meeting was, I killed Lillian. And you'll never reveal it. Although it could still be that Dalton killed Lillian. Emmy says he said his relationship with Lily was not romantic, but people think it was. Could the club owners think they split up when Dalton left the club and Lily got engaged to McBain? I don't think so. I think the club owners know all about it because I think they're intercepting the messages and reading them. And that's why I think they're blackmailing. So the past loss has to be something. I think loss. I think when you say loss, you mean someone died. You don't say loss when you lost a girlfriend. If you wanted to talk about someone's breakup, you would say it differently. And Tina says, how come Vesta had Mag's ring? That is confusing to me, I must admit. That is confusing to me, I must admit. Shall we read that again? She comes in, she's smoking a cigarette like a little femme fatale here. He goes to her, he takes her left hand, so he's like looking at her hand. And he goes, what happened to the ring that should be on your finger? He taps his finger. What happened to your ring? He says to her. Vesta, dear, how did you dispose of that little bauble? What happened to your ring? How did you dispose of that? She laughs. She says, you wanted something Ward would remember, didn't you? And he says, you almost killed him. Is it possible that Vesta was Dalton Ward's previous fiancée? Is it possible Dalton and Vesta were fiancés? And that's the previous fiancée? Another possibility is David's involved with a blackmail scheme. Ugh, I don't see it. Maybe. Debbie says, are Mags and Vesta fiancé? We're told in the first letter that they're devoted to each other. Yes, we were. So it wasn't his ring, it was hers. Yes, it was definitely her ring, and he's telling her, what happened to the ring you used to wear on your finger? And she says it was a fake little bauble. I'm just wondering if she was the second fiancé that we're told about that Dalton Ward had. But I'm not sure how that adds anything. Clearly, Vesta is saying here that Mags wanted her to put pressure on Dalton. She just went too far. I don't suppose it's really relevant to us. If Vesta was Dalton's previous fiancée, it doesn't make any bit of difference. She's obviously doesn't care too much about it. I wouldn't be surprised if she was. Dalton gave a fake diamond ring to Vesta and she fed it to him as personal revenge for leaving her. It's possible. It's possible. What about the question of when Dalton tried to burn the note? Well, that's an interesting question. That's an unresolved question that we have. I think some of us think he burned it right that night, but now I'm in the camp now that says he threw those things in the. My theory is that 3 weeks ago, the police come to his house and they say Lillian's dead. She committed suicide, or did you push her? When was the last time you saw her? And he says, I haven't seen her in weeks. We're just friends. I don't know anything about it. Then the police leave, and he instantly goes, he throws the notes in the fire. He throws the pin in the fire. He's like, I got to get rid of all of this stuff. And that was 2 weeks ago, and it just never fully burned. It's in his study. He didn't worry about it. Ginny says, why did David visit Dalton hours before the police questioning him? I don't know if David visited Dalton before or after. It's a good question, though. I mean, one theory was that David believed that Dalton killed her. So he was confronting him, saying, hey, I think you're involved. But it seems if you believe that David McBain killed her, then he couldn't have been visiting about that. But he could have been visiting, trying to get him rattled to write up that the police suspect him. Like maybe David McBain wanted to figure out what he knew, to figure out what the police asked about, to write a story exposing him. I mean, he is the reporter trying to expose Dalton, so maybe he caught whiff that the police were interviewing him about the death, and maybe he wanted to go and see if he could dredge up some problems. Debbie says, doesn't want to drag Lily's name through the mud, which would point against him being involved in the blackmail. That's a good point. I think that's a good point. Why would he care about her reputation now? Well, he does care. He obviously cares. In the past letter, he wants justice for her. So I mean, he's gone a little bit crazy. So he may have killed her, but still blamed Dalton for stealing him away from her. Killed her out of jealousy. Yes, what Debbie said. Although there's still the possibility that Dalton Ward killed her. Like she told him, hey, we're about to be found out. And he killed her, dropped the fake note. And McBain is trying to catch him. Like, that felt like a fake suicide note to me, but it could always be Dalton Ward that wrote the fake suicide note. And McBain trying to get justice for her. No. Yeah. I guess both those theories are valid, but if Dalton killed her, how did he persuade McBain to write a fake suicide? No, that theory would be that Dalton wrote the suicide note and just left it on her body or left it on the side of the bridge. But then you'd have to have the explanation for the message that was left for Lily. What's the message here? Lily, wait for me tonight on Blackfriars Bridge. I guess either way, I mean, imagine McBain discovers this note the day after she dies, and he knows that she jumped off the bridge or died at the bridge. Now McBain would see this note and suspect that Dalton killed her. But it is weird how he would find that note, transcribe it. Why would he transcribe it? He wouldn't. He wouldn't. That's the key. This is the absolutely key insight of whether it was Rob or ME last week. This was the brilliant insight explaining why In McBain's notebook are the etchings of this coded message. So if you imagine that McBain found this real note, it would make no sense that he would copy it into his notebook and tear it out. He'd have the note. The only way it makes sense is if McBain wrote this note. And if McBain wrote this note, tore it out, left it for Lillian, then McBain is her killer. So I'm now settled that McBain has killed her and he's gone crazy and he's now hunting down Dalton to expose him. And he says, I don't think McBain is blackmailing. I think Mags leaked info to him, hoping he'd write articles discrediting Dalton, but McBain reacted in a way Mags didn't expect. It's Mags blackmailing. I agree with Emmy. I agree with Emmy. If McBain wants justice for Lily, what's his goal? Just to torment Dalton on occasion? I think McBain is jealous of Dalton's life and hates Dalton and is angry that Dalton stole Lillian away from him and made him kill her. And he wants to ruin Dalton's life. He's not blackmailing him. He's just preparing to write a story to reveal him. Macon Leary says the note is Burns. The suicide note is a direct quote from Robert Burns' poem. Is that right, Macon? If that's true, then that really seems to suggest that McBain wrote Fake the Suicide. And Tina says yes. I mean, I suppose you could say that Dalton Ward might know that and could write it to make it look like, but no. Okay, it's a direct Burns quote. Okay, so that really locks it down. That McBain has killed his fiancée after discovering she was having an affair with Dalton. And now he's going to get his revenge on Dalton by writing up, exposing him. It's from a poem called To a Mouse. Okay. All right, so again, that was the insight from last week. That was a very clever insight last week that locked us in on thinking that the newspaper writer McBain had killed his girlfriend. Now, seems like the only really remaining question for us is the blackmail. Vegedog says, I'm thinking Vesta was the first Fickle fiancé. Yeah, I think it's very possible that Vesta was the first fiancé. Although that seems like very much a side story. And Tina says, Vesta is not fickle. She's something, but she's not fickle. Well, I don't know. You know, she's different. She's going her own way. But it doesn't solve the problem. But are we all in agreement now that it's Sunny, Mags, and Vesta that are extorting Dalton Ward? And maybe Vesta is... It's weird that Vesta would be punishing Dalton by feeding him that ring. Maybe she didn't like that it was fake. Yeah. I think I agree with that. Maybe she didn't like that it was a fake ring. Like, she figured out that he's a fraud. Vesta figured out that Dalton is a fraud. And so she broke off the engagement. She made him choke on his ring. Maybe even in fact, Dalton was engaged to Vesta when he was having an affair with Lillian. And so maybe Vesta is also angry at him for that. What were the questions in the first letter? All right, let's look at the questions, then we're gonna wrap this up here. Is Mr. Ward the victim of an attack? And if so, how exactly was the crime executed? Okay, so he was fed the ring by Vesta to send a message, but also we think maybe a personal message from her, a message from Sunny Mags about don't stop with the temperance, but also maybe a message from her like take your fake ring and shove it. Who would have a strong motive to harm Mr. Ward, and could there have been any accomplices? So it sounds like our answer to this is that both David McBain wants to harm him, his reputation, and Sunny Mags and Vesta want to harm him. All three possibly for slightly different reasons, but Mags for to extort him so he won't do the temperance, McBain for revenge for stealing his girlfriend, and maybe Vesta revenge for the breakup. The items Mistress are found in the fireplace. That is the golden pin and the charred note leave me perplexed. What is their significance? All right, well, we know the note was from Lillian saying David found out. We know the gold pin was because he wants no evidence of him. He's leaving his past behind with the club. There's some disagreement about when he burned that note from this group, but it feels like we know the answers to all those now. All right, so what we should do now is we should stop. We should stop because we're going to get a chance to talk about this a little more, get our final theories on the record before we open our next solution. So we're going to stop here. Does anyone subscribe to Dear Holmes, by the way? Has anyone submitted a solution? Remember that the way this game works is you can submit your solution before they deliver the official solutions. And if you're the best, if you submit the best and earliest solution, you could win recognition on the site. It's not something we've done yet. We're going to break here, though, and we're going to stop today's session. Next week, hopefully, we'll read the solution. Before it is, we'll have our last chance to get on the record with our theories. Maybe sometime in this week, we'll start playing another mystery game on the channel. You can stop by the Board Game Geek Guild. There's a game queue thread for that if you want to help decide what to play next. And if you're interested in classic mysteries, fair play mystery books, Jonathan Warner, one of the people who regularly joins us, has started a Discord where we're going through mystery books. Last week we read The Red Right Hand, last couple weeks. Now it's The Case of the Poisoned Chocolate, which is quite a cool classic story. You can even get an audiobook of that for free in public domain if you want to listen along and help discuss that. There's a link to that on the Board Game Geek section for this channel. You can find a link to that on the About page. And I'll see you guys next time.